I have got a podcast sponsor. I was happy to partner with Modern Roots Life, and this is really cool because it's a Christian company. Modern Roots Life, they provide natural health supplements, natural salts, beef liver, magnesium, copper, lots of things. Natural, third-party tested supplements. And I think for me, I often complain about being very tired and having a bit of brain fog trying to do everything that we're trying to do. So I just started my regime. And so I'm excited to see how it works out, because I think, like you guys in this community, that we don't really want to go to the doctor anymore. And I'm not saying you'll never have to, but I'm saying that if I can be more healthy, then I'm doing my best to try to do that now, physically and spiritually and mentally. So if you guys want to check out Modern Roots Life, check out the link in my description. People often ask how they can support me. Well, I think it's really cool if you can support me by supporting people that support me, and you get something in return. And obviously being healthy is a pretty good return. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Ancient Roots of Life and Wellness podcast. Once again, I got my co-host with me from Modern Roots Life, Josh Truex. What's going on, Josh?
Hey, brother. Good to see you.
Yeah, we were just talking about how last week's episode was like a monster episode. It was 2 episodes, really, because literally the beginning of the show, me and Josh were just talking Bible and Apocrypha and just everything we were just interested in. And that's what I typically do. I'll just hit record sometimes, because just for bonus stuff, if anything interesting said. And then, we just continue to go. And it was like, at this point, I was like, okay, this is a full podcast. And then we recorded the health portion of the podcast, which is kind of what the show is about. But then the more we've been seeing, it's like, obviously me and Josh only have so many opportunities per week to talk, and we're obviously all interested in the exact same thing. So we thought maybe this show could be changing a little bit. Maybe it'll be, because we've already kind of went through the basics of being healthy and the protocol. Then maybe the rest of the show could be more of like, this could be a little bit of a grab bag, and then we'd have obviously a segment where we would talk about, maybe take topics, we would try to expand upon stuff and give people maybe like a bite-sized piece with inside of, what all the stuff we're all interested in anyways.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's kind of some of the spontaneity, whatever you say, the spontaneous kind of side of it, is the best part for anything. I mean, obviously we can sit there and I can go on and on about all the health subjects and stuff like that. But I mean, the reason that I even sought you out in the beginning was simply because of these subjects and everything that we enjoy talking about. And
yeah, well, I mean, I think that of course you have in this community is that what I said, I remember when we decided to partner together, when I kind of cut my first little ad, I was saying that, there's the things that make up us as human beings, but you got mind, body, and spirit. And we're trying to take care of all of them. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like we're not trying to neglect any one part of this thing. Obviously, I think that why this works is because I want all 3 to be healthy. Right? So like the podcast is great because obviously it spans upon the things we're thinking about. So your mind is asking new questions, you're learning more things, and obviously hopefully the things we're talking about will edify your spirit and get you to seek God more. And then through that, being healthy and trying to understand it all and like the biblical concepts behind like how God, what's the way God intended to do with our bodies, and like how are they meant to work? Like what's the proper way? And it is fundamental to go back to the scriptures. Like, so how are they doing it then? And why is it so much different than now? And like, how could we learn from that?
Yeah, that's, there's a lot of controversy in that subject too, because you look at the times of Noah and it seems as if they weren't consuming meat. And then people are like, oh, there wouldn't have been like any interaction with the animals at all, which I really, even if you weren't eating the meat back in Noah's time, I still think he would have been wise enough to use the milk and the butters and whatever. Like, I can't imagine Abba would have been like, here's this crazy world. Like, here's all this stuff. And you know nothing. And then not have like shown his sons and daughters, like this. So a lot of people say that that's the way we should be eating. That is like a vegetarian lifestyle. But then you look at, coming post-flood. So that would have been pre-flood. And then post flood, it's you can see that it's almost being sanctioned, right? Like it's almost like he's talking about it very specifically, saying if you're going to have the flesh, you consume these kind of animals for clean animals, and they're all basically eating from the cud, which is grass fed. And then you look at everything that I always talk about. I literally based everything off of scripture. And then when Morley Robbins, like a good buddy of mine who I've gone through his courses and stuff like that, he's really big on like the copper subject and all the different things with grass-fed animals and stuff like that. And so I actually wrote him and said, like, you're doing Abba's work, because the iron overload in the body is like what shuts down our copper, which is what we get from those grass-fed animals that scripture lists as clean animals. And I said, like it even says in Daniel that what does it say? It doesn't mix with the miry clay. The iron doesn't mix with the miry clay. And you look at, that's literally what destroys our body faster than anything. So I think that, yes, maybe in Noah's times, there was that specific dietary kind of like intake they were having there. That was more of a vegetarian-based lifestyle, of course, because it doesn't specifically talk about anything. I mean, but in Noah's time, post-flood, I mean, the first thing he did was like slaughter and set up like that. So you can see it like goes right into it. And then Abba's like, okay, this is the way you're going to do it. You're going to eat these animals. These are the ones that are good for you. He's very particular about swine and different things like that through scripture. I know that's another big subject of controversy. I'm not here to, crack anybody over the head and be like, you shouldn't be eating this, you shouldn't be eating that. I mean, I think scripture supports and says what it is, but you can also see, like we're talking about, pre-flood, vegetarian, post-flood, very like, carnivore kind of intake for their diet, as well as the specifics on which animals they were doing, the ways to prepare them, everything from salt to, the way that they would make sure the animal was butchered correctly. And that's a big one, because a lot of people, that's another, like, you could segue so many ways on this subject alone, where even with the butchering of an animal, people are like, oh, it gets the blood out. And then there's this big debate over hemoglobin-based blood, which is like what would be blood. The oxygen, the life is in the blood. That's literally nefesh is the soul, but the nefash you would be looking at, like that life in the blood, which I believe is the oxygen, because you can see like those, like hemoglobin-based blood is not in our muscle tissues that you eat, in the organs and the different things like that. It's not. It's different. Myoglobin is what it's called. So even for that, you can see how Abba tells them, even though there is myoglobin in the tissues and there's hemoglobin here and ways to avoid it, as long as you just butcher the animal correctly, he still puts those specifics on there. And he also tells you about the grass-fed animals, which I think nowadays, if we didn't have grass-fed animals, we would be struggling. And I know a lot of plant-based eaters and people who are quote unquote vegan, which I think if you're somebody who just eats plants and you avoid animal-based proteins and things like that you should, like veganism is actually like, there's like a focus on animals there, and like in a worship setting and stuff. I think it's pretty evident versus just saying you're like plant-based eating. But we did plant-based eating for a long time, but I think it's pretty evident when you do hair tests and blood tests in the correct way that you'll see the body struggles with certain attributes, certain characteristics struggle, and that's what the grass-fed animals really help to. That's why I always talk about retinol vitamin A, because copper and retinol vitamin A are very big in grass-fed animals, and the retinol vitamin A makes 70 times more energy than any plant-based source. That was honestly the biggest catalyst for me going into this line of studies and everything like that. So to get back to like what you were saying, there is, I think the second one, post-flood, carries throughout all the way through. And I think Abba set it up not just for that time in the beginning of the post-flood world, but also for carrying it out all the way to our time, knowing that they would be doing what they're doing and inflicting the impact that they have on the world through everything from what's in the sky to what's in our food and our waters, what's not in our soil, what's in animals that shouldn't be in animals anymore, everything, even our produce. There's there's phyto and xenoestrogens. So when people get into like heavy plant-based eating, there's a lot of things that aren't the same anymore. Like Popeye used to eat the spinach and he would get all buff, right?
But that's weird. That's weird. That's not how we know how gaining muscle works.
Yeah, copper used to be rich in iron, but now because of all the feminizing from different things that are laden, the sky is laden with all these, everything that we know is up there from borium, strontium, aluminum, different things like that, has been proven through many scientific studies with rainwater and different things like that. But when you get into looking at those things, you understand not so much like the conspiratory side of it. It's just there's a direct application of what happens when those things come down onto your plants. Like it feminizes them. It changes a copper-based spinach is now rich in iron. There's so many different attributes that change from acid rains are now eroding tons and tons of iron and arsenic and different things that were never eroding before because the water's more acidic that's coming out of the sky. So it's causing heavier metals to be pulled out of the soil into our water and into our foods. So I think Abba did, the obvious great job to foreshadow or forecast basically what would be hitting the world and us today and give us our best fighting chance, which I do believe is what you can find. Every grass-fed animal, like clean animals in scripture, the difference people get into it's bottom feeders, it's this with unclean. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that across the board. The truth is, if you study the chemistry and the physiology of all the clean animals versus the unclean animals, this one thing that rings true all the way across the board. Clean animals make nutrition for other biological life as far as like land mammals, sea mammals, depending on if you're talking about ocean or land. And then unclean animals make nutrition for the earth that later makes nutrition. So like a pig dies, that animal is considered like a waste and poison carrier. It can carry things that would otherwise kill us, but it can house them and contain them. And as long as nothing eats it, then those poisons are contained. It dies, it breaks down, it goes into the earth. It takes those nutrients because when you get a pig mineral, it's not going to be like a horse animal or a cow animal. And when it rots and the minerals go back into the soil, the minerals are minerals, right? Like minerals stick. You throw minerals into a fire, they are what's left over. So these minerals go into the earth absorbs those minerals, and then it can make other life that can be eaten by like grass-fed animals. It can be grown into plants, things like that. So that's how it works. Like those are kind of like the cleanup crew is the way I describe unclean animals in scripture that you'll find in Leviticus and other parts. And then you got clean animals, but that was a big rant. Let you talk a little bit.
No, I was gonna say, what the funny thing is, I went on a podcast a couple months ago, and I was talking with Old World Florida, Dr. Longo, and he was of the mindset that Jesus was a vegetarian, and that's the only way to go. But and I wasn't fully convinced because I mentioned to him, I said, well, Jesus did cook fish. After he was resurrected, he told the apostles to cast their nets. They did on the other side of the boat. It's too big a haul for them, just tearing their nets. And then he said, bring me some fish. And he's the one who cooked them for them. So if anything, he might have been pescatarian, but I got to give him credit because he did point to me in the Old Testament more times than I realized. And I guess I noticed it without really noticing it.
Right.
That God often said that he did not want their sacrifices.
Yeah.
And I just thought it was just kind of more aligned with that in Samuel it says that he would rather you be obedient than to sacrifice. So like it's not enough. It's kind of like, like you have your wife. You can't just intentionally do something that's wrong and then say, well, I'm going to get her some roses later. It's like,
yeah.
I'd rather you just be honest and not be a scumbag. Like, what do you think that's going to make it up every time you do it? I thought that's kind of what it meant, but the more I started to notice, when Noah, right after the ark comes to rest, he sacrificed the animal, and you can tell that God's not pleased. At first it says there's a pleasing aroma, but then he says, it's like he pronounces a curse.
From this point on, I know their hearts are going to be evil.
He says that men are going to be evil, and then animals are going to fear man. And then there's also going to be this blood debt that's going to be required after that. And that's a really weird thing for God to say if he actually was cool with Noah sacrificing those animals.
I mean, I think also too, you just a short time before that, like the interaction in Enoch, we see with the adulteration of every man, beast. You know, they were messing with stuff back there. So I think part of it too could have been like he's not letting his animals just walk up to these guys who are like trying to like. I mean, nowadays do like genomic sequencing or like whatever you look into, you know what I mean? Like hybridization and stuff, you know? So they kind of screwed up the natural process in Enoch. You can see like they were messing with things. And if they were fallen angels and they had like, you know, quote unquote mystical powers type thing, if they were you know, I mean, they obviously had more abilities than humans did. And so who knows to what the extent that they had. I mean, I think Enoch explains in a big way. I think the sacrifice is pretty evident. He says in Ezekiel 20, you know, like this is one big thing that kind of like really changed my heart when I was studying things the way I was, like, you know, being in the Torah community. And it was just he says, I gave them commandments that were not good. Like, why would he ever give them commandments that were not good? You know, and judgments they would not follow, and he turned them over to their own ways. And this is the thing, like I always talk about, there was so many people that came out of Egypt in that Exodus that didn't want to change their heart. That these people were doing like blood rituals, you know, things that we would consider nasty, like drinking of blood or, you know, things around like menstruation, stuff like that. Like there's a lot of like rituals with these things, and it's like most people like us would just be like, oh no, this is nasty, you know what I mean? But obviously these people were growing up learning these things were what made their gods happy. So it's like, how did they know anything until Ab was like, look, in our camp we don't get down with that, like we don't do
right,
know?
it's like this is how you worship a god, right?
Yep.
It's like this is how they know, because this is what they've seen the other nations do. You know, it's funny because I was literally just reading this morning. I was reading in First Kings, and so I was reading. This is chapter 3, and so just read what it says. And it's like I had a different view of this, but the more I'm kind of seeing like that God really. So what I think that what God had really given them, He gave them the Passover, right? So there was going to be one sacrifice. It was almost like there was like one sacrifice a year.
Yeah.
But they wanted to sacrifice all the time to Him. And I think the more I could kind of see that, it's like, so obviously, remember, Solomon's good at the beginning. He goes off the rails eventually. But it says, this is starting with verse 2, and it says, the only people sacrifice in high places, because there was no house built unto the name of the Lord until those days. And Solomon loved the Lord, walking in the statutes of David his father, only he sacrificed and burnt incense in the high places. So when I used to think it's like, so they were sacrificing to false gods in the high places, but that's really not what it's saying right there, because it's saying like that.
It's like a golden calf.
What it was actually saying is like, it sounds like that they were doing sacrifices to God, but there was no place to do it other than the high places because there was no temple yet.
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah, so he was saying, so it was funny. So like, it was saying that Solomon at that time, he loved the Lord. And he walked in the statutes just like David did. Only he went and sacrificed at the high places, and he burnt the incense there. So who was he doing? I don't think he was doing it to Moloch then. I don't think he was doing it to the Baals then. I think he was doing it to the Lord, but it's like it's something that God really never wanted him to do.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the thing. It's like you're absolutely right. It's like that's what we can't. I forgot, it was Vitaly who was saying something really interesting. It was saying that, I forgot exactly the way he explained. He was a little more eloquent than I'm about to be. But it's like, just because the Bible says that some holy, you know, and a patriarch did something does not mean it was sanctified by God for him to do that. It might have been God allowed him to do that, but that was never, what did he say? It was, it's descriptive versus prescriptive. Yeah. So it wasn't that God told him to go do that. It's just like the Bible's writing down what happened.
Yep.
And it's like, it really is interesting. I feel like that's a little more nuance that I'm learning from the Bible, is like that God is allowing men to do certain things, but he's not always co-signing on it.
He even let him bring the sacrifices, but then they started bringing the messed up animals that were all beaten and broken, and and they literally just botched everything that he was telling him to do. And even right before that, what you just brought up, I thought you were actually going to bring it up, but David, when he went to the head of the season festival, I know I'm not going to get into the calendar, but I know people call it the New Moon Festival, but I firmly believe it's the head of the season. What Hodesh should mean is talking about the head of the season, the 4 dividing seasons of the year. And that's what David was supposed to be at there with Saul. And Saul's like, where's David? And he told him to tell him that he went up to his annual sacrifice for the Yahudim, or it says in some, it just says Jews, but I think it would have said Hebrews. You know what I mean?
It probably didn't say like,
or just like if it said Yahudim, it would have been talking about Judah. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but the
Judahites.
You got evidence that he literally was telling you about a single. I mean, look at everything. This is why I question, and trust me, like I say, I'm still a commandment keeper. I still like walked away from the ways of the world. It's like I don't, when I say that, like I'm not in the Torah community or anything like that, so many people like wonder what I'm saying with that, but it's like there was reasons why I started asking so many questions, because it's like they wanted sacrifice, and he's like, I already gave you a sacrifice. Like, you have the sacrifice every year, this thing where you should be living good throughout the year. And then at these sanctioned events, like, I tell you to do these things, but I already gave it to you. And then he expanded. This shows how long-suffering and loving he is for his children, to have compassion and kind of like work with them. He's not just cut and dry, like my way or the highway. He literally shows you through your mistakes and through your bad requests that, you know, like, I told you, this isn't the right way, you know? And so after that, it's like, you can see that they asked for a king with Samuel. And so again, he's like, I already gave you a king. It's me. Like, I gave you a king. And then you had the coming king, obviously. But it's like all these things that they asked to do were obviously the ways of the nations when you see it. I mean, like I always bring up, Jethro was a Midian priest. Like, you get I forget what Job's name was called, but in the last chapter of Job in the Septuagint, it tells you, it's not Jobab, is it? But anyways, it talks about Job's name when he was actually an Edomite king. So when you look at the book of Job with that, if that's all true, then that would make a lot of sense on why he went through a lot. Maybe he had some reproach from the father that Satan was allowed to ask for those requests to challenge him like that, to see if he would go back to his old ways. But there's so many people that you see, even Caleb, because people are like, oh, it's a bloodline. But I'm like, is it really? Caleb was a Canaanite king.
He was a Kezite. Is that what it's called?
So it's like he came from the literal ites, and he was the king of Judah.
Well, was it Ruth was a Moabite woman?
Yeah, there's so many things where people get into
it.
Yeah,
they often say that. It's funny how people just gloss over. I learned that was one of the first things I really started to notice when it was like I was starting to understand like the conflict out in the Middle East and like who the real people are. I was like, well, it seems to me that it's really not a specific person, because we already know that, you know, probably one of the favorite child of Isaac, or not Isaac, but of Jacob, who's Israel, his wife was Egyptian. Like right off the bat, like you already know, it's like that. So there's not this clean bloodline. It's unfiltered. It's like, no, like right away, it's like the favorite son. And obviously at that point, it was like the two biggest parts of Israel were Manasseh and Ephraim, right? Yep. And that's often what Israel is even referred to as, Ephraim, right?
Yeah.
Like
his name changed too, yeah, just like Jacob, they changed his name to Israel or Yasharel.
Yeah, so but yeah, with that being said, I don't know, it kind of does blow me away where you do see that. I think that's the problem with, like, when you get into, like, it's not the people's hearts that are trying to seek the Torah stuff, but it's almost like you're trying to emulate the men, but you should be really trying to emulate Jesus, because like he was not like them. So like just because God let them do that. And I think the example you just brought up was probably the most easy to see, is that, yeah, God did not want them to have a king. But you can see, because you could see the dialogue between Samuel and God, and he's saying, like, they're not rejecting you, they're rejecting me. Yep. But I'm going to give them one anyways. So, like, you already know that, like, he doesn't really want to, but he knows that they're going to ask for it, and so he's going to give them one. And so I think that's, like, if you can kind of see it, I think that's a real clear example. But there's way more nuance in, like, the stuff probably with, some of the stuff, just like we talked about a long time ago, about how it's kind of confusing when the Pharisees approached Jesus talking about that, what do they talk about? Divorce. And they said, isn't it written in the law of Moses? You just hand a woman a piece of paper and you just send her on her way. And then Jesus corrects them and say, that's really not what God ever intended. And I always kind of sit back about like, what does that mean? Because like I thought that the law of Moses was what God intended. I thought God told him to tell them all the things, and he's like, no, that's because of your hard hearts that Moses did that. And I thought, but that should be a clue to say that just because that's what he, like you think about the Sermon on the Mount. It's like, you guys think it's this way, but I'm telling you what the right way is. Like, it's because all these things are all issues of the heart. That's your 10 commandments. It's like, what the first half is about how you love God, and then the rest of it's about how you love each other. And then that's all the law and prophets. So when he comes, like, that's all together is like what he's trying to show people, like how you do that in, like how you actually walk that versus just say you do. And I thought that's really interesting because, to go back to the sacrifice part, it is interesting. I wonder if, like, health-wise, like you said, and I've heard this often, and obviously I'm a meat eater, so I'm not saying that I'm that Dr. Longo converted me, but I do wonder if, like, okay, let's just say that God obviously told them to sacrifice the Passover lamb, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what if we eat too much meat? Is that possible? Is it possible that, or is it also possible that you said that if you take a person probably who was eating like a normal diet, like probably we have, and then they went cold turkey and they started going vegan or whatever, do you think that do you think the body would adapt to, like this new diet? Like what would the body do? I mean, you could also think about it, like you're talking about the mega flora and the mega fauna and all the way the world was probably different before the flood. Like, do you think that maybe that the fruits they would have been eating would have been...
I think you see remnants of that, like when they were carrying the grapes out, like I still think that like some of that remained from the pre-flood world but if you think about it, if the waters rose so much, right, you would be getting closer to the dome, and you'd be in a less and less oxygen the higher the waters raise. So I imagine like if they, like you look at the ocean floor, you see like how much lower it was, especially around Florida. It looks like the Gulf of Mexico is like this little lake in the middle with all this crazy land around it. If that's the case, then you would realize they would have had insane amounts of oxygen. I think literally it would have just made everything bigger. And maybe Abba was like, oh, you guys don't want to, he's not vindictive like we are and talking the way that I am, but still it's like, I gave you all this beauty, all this everything, and you just want to adulterate it. I imagine he probably took away some of the amazing lush, everything he did. He said 120 years would be their lifespan. Then he said, it seemed like he was kind of like changing things because like it wasn't working the way that, the appreciation wasn't there for it.
Right. It's like the Israelites when they're coming out of Egypt and how awful they are. And that's another good example where obviously he's not sending them meat. He's sending them manna from heaven, which is like, was described as some kind of like almost kind of honeycomb type thing. Some kind of a honey bread type.
Probably
where
they could make it, John ate and stuff like that. It might have been what they were given, it was like,
they could make it into some kind of a bread, some kind of wafer, but it was
bread. Yep.
Yeah. So what they wanted meat. And then, what did God say? He's like, I'm going to send you some meat. I'm going to make you sick. I'm going to send you so much. It was like, he didn't want to send them the quail, but he did anyways. And then,
I think he said, didn't he say something like, you basically like, you could have just asked for it. You know what I mean? Instead of like, he heard their groans and their grumbling, like it was constantly like in the background. They were always like saying this and grumbling and it was like having to be brought to him, and it was instead of, if they just came and said, oh, this is amazing, Most High, we love you. Thank you so much for everything you're doing for us. And then, please don't be mad. Like how Abraham and different ones talked to him where they were like,
right.
Don't be mad, Father.
They had a healthy fear of the Lord. The way
like Elijah, Eliyahu, whichever way you want to say that. Like, he basically was, a lot of them that were really strong. Like Gideon was a good one when he's asking him about the wet and the dry, and he's like, "Please don't be."
I was always amazed at the patience of the angel of the Lord. The way Because you're thinking like he's just telling them to do this thing, and he's like, "Can I see a sign?
Yeah.
How about this? Okay, I saw that sign. How about this?" And I was
Yeah.
like, but yeah, it's like it was amazing. Like God, when He is patient with somebody, like, and I guess maybe obviously God knows their heart, so He's not.
They could have done things, but like that's the thing. Like, what was it? 660,000 people from Yasharel, Israel, and then like they estimate like in the millions of like other people from the nations that left in the Exodus. So it's kind of like a dwarfing amount of like how many people came into quote unquote Israel, but how many of them seem to be like different sects. Because even in the Maccabean times, like I always bring that up, like that seems to be where like the whole Yahudaism, Judaism thing like was listed, written right in there and stuff. So it's like how many infiltrating groups were like there that still kept their ways, right? Like they came and they seemed better for that period of time.
How many Edomites do you think were in that? Were in that? Yeah, I mean, because you really think about, that is the thing. It's like, yeah, you're apt to point that out because if you really think about it, who had grain during the famine in Joseph's time?
Mitzrayim. Yep.
Only Egypt did.
Yeah.
So obviously, if you look geographically, I know a lot of people don't believe that that's the real Holy Land.
Still,
okay, let's just say that it is.
Yeah.
Even if it's not, we already know what's north of Egypt would be Moab and Edom, right?
Yep.
So you not only have Israel, you would have had Philistines probably too going down there too. I mean, everybody who would have been trying to get some bread, they would have went down there to Egypt. And then so they all go down there. None of them are Egyptians. Obviously, the Egyptians know who's Egyptian. So they probably would have treated not just the Hebrews poorly. They would have treated them all poorly.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Well, because you could really think about it. It's like, do you think that they care that Edom is Esau? Esau is Jacob's brother.
Yep.
So that they would have obviously, how much different would those people have looked and talked? Mm-hmm. Maybe not that much. So from their perspective, it would have been like the Egyptians would have saw them looking the same. So they treat them all badly. So when you think about all the slavery in Egypt, when they all left, it was probably like everybody who was probably not Egyptian was probably ready to get the heck out of there. And probably some of the Egyptians too who feared God when they saw the judgments.
People might have just bounced out of that place with all that stuff was happening. Could you imagine, like, if I was living there and everything turned to blood and flies and gnats? I don't care what's going on at first. Like, if I'm a non-believer and I'm like, I don't care about your God, this God. If whatever is causing this, I want no part of it. So I'm going to go where that guy says he's going to stop doing this stuff, because it's like, think how many people just left because they thought there was no other choice. Like, it was literally getting massacred in front of their face. And then if they were told that all of the firstborns were going to be killed and it actually happened, I'm pretty sure that was the nail in the quote unquote coffin for, like a lot of those people when they were like, whoa, okay, we did it and we listened to you, but everybody still died over there. I'm going, so they might have had a healthy fear.
I think that, I can't remember if it was Michael Heiser who said it, that like what you had, like when you had the Tower of Babel separation, right. And then you had God separated the nations like amongst the numbers of the sons of God. So you kind of had all these, the prince of whatever these regions would have been. The prince of those regions would have been a principality, would have been an angel.
Right.
A heavenly being. But then obviously he carved out his own, which was Abraham, and he was going to make a great nation through him. So, what I was going to say is that, but what God's original plan is that first he was going to show his power in Egypt, and he was going to show who the Most High God was.
Right.
And so I know that a lot of people, if you guys have ever looked into this, you can probably do a web search on this, that the plagues all correlate to these really powerful gods in Egypt, who they would have viewed for, like the god of cattle, the god of the river, the god of air. So all these plagues correlate, where it's like God is like taking them out one by one, and it was like then the end was like that he parted the sea, right. So they knew who was in charge, and so anybody who obviously feared the Lord and saw, they probably would have left. And I think the interesting part about like what you said is that a good example of this is then when they go, the first place they're going to take out when they enter Canaan is Jericho. And you have an example of Rahab. She says, I heard what y'all did. I heard what your God did when you left Egypt. Everybody's terrified of what's going to happen because they know what happened. And so, like, that's what Michael Heiser was saying. So, like, God was going to show his awesome power. And then people were going to fear the Lord. And those who did, but that's the beginning of wisdom. So you fear the Lord. And then, they obviously, you align with them. And so God was going to draw all the nations back to him by that. And so, yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting. So, yeah, you would have thought that, yeah, God is not necessarily a respecter of persons per se. Like, so he would have allowed everybody who feared him and believed to come in to be treated like a native born.
Yeah, he says that you come to my Torah instructions. I believe, Torah means to point or give direction. It's crazy. If you look at Daniel 8:25, I believe it is, it talks about Satan's craft and what would be put in during that time, and that's literally written in the Strong's, I believe, as the exact opposite of the word Torah. It's like a negative point or give direction. So, but in Exodus 12:47 and somewhere I forget in Numbers, it says like there's one set of instructions for the native and for the stranger, and if the stranger comes and does those things, he is as the native born. So it's like it's obvious that he wasn't setting these things up. You can see it, like even another one, the first order of business for Solomon when he gets in, he marries Pharaoh's daughter.
I know.
It's like he literally as mad as you could have made Abba. Like, could you imagine? Like, I all the time I find myself saying, Father, like you are so insanely patient. Like it doesn't even, or incredibly patient. I shouldn't say insanely patient because to me, it's like it would make you like insane with that kind of patience. To like,
I know, right? Is this like Solomon? That's the real contradiction with Solomon. It's like that he's supposed to be the wisest man up before him and after him. God gave nobody more wisdom than Solomon. Then why did Solomon do so many jacked up things? Yeah, like that's literally like one of the first thing he tells them when they're going into the land. Do not marry. Have nothing to do with their women because they're going to lead you astray. So what happens to Solomon? It's funny. I just posted one of those memes again where like it's like this guy, this little cartoon guy, and it's say like Solomon every day after marrying 700 wives, and just hear all this chatter in the background. And he's like getting out of bed, and he's just like, yeah, you're like, that's literally the story of Solomon. Is like that he was so wise, but obviously he had his trap was the honeypots, right? Is that
even you read Judges on the bloodline argument. You just made me remember Judges 1-3. He literally says that those, because it was the Jebusites, I believe it was, that Joshua didn't like get rid of from whatever, and they lied to him.
They didn't purge all the people out of Jerusalem.
And so
which kind of makes sense why Jerusalem ends up always being so bad.
Exactly, right? What's the book? Joshua Judges Ruth, right? We always heard that in Sunday school and everything often, in our studies. And it's like, so Judges comes right after that. So literally right at the end of Joshua, it goes into Judges. And then he says that they passed not only their sons, but their daughters also back and forth with all of those tribes. So when people argue about this whole pure bloodline or any kind of bloodline focus, I believe it ends in Matthew with Messiah's name for a reason. It was all to point towards Messiah. But
it's always about one bloodline.
Yeah,
from
Messiah's
Adam
blood
to the Messiah. And that's the only real bloodline that really matters. It was from him to him.
Yep. Exactly. And Judges, if you want the smoking gun for that argument, Judges 1-3 literally lists everyone. It's going through the tribes saying they passed their sons and daughter. And Abba says, I will leave them in their midst to keep them primed for war. And so when you get into like all the different, I think you look at there's 12 colors of people in the world, there's 12 soil taxonomies. If you look at the soil taxonomy, there's literally 12 descriptions of different clay or soil in the world and 12 colors of people in the world. I don't think he's a favor of persons. I think from the very beginning of it, it started one way and there was the blending bowl. I mean, a lot of people, you could talk about everything from like pre-Adamites and different things like that. If this this is cyclical and stuff like that. A lot of people argue that, where there was like the land races, they call them. That's an interesting study with like the whole Neanderthal thing and different stuff. That's a wild one.
I think me and Brian have long assumed that the Neanderthals, these other kind of almost human races, that's some Nephilim stuff right there.
Yeah, I mean,
if you look at, if you really think about like Cro-Magnon man, he was big and he looks like he's kind of deformed. Doesn't that make you think of it as some big dumb giant?
Yeah.
It's kind of like trolls and Shrek and all that stuff. Like, what would their skulls look like? Almost human, but not quite human.
Yep, could very well be, because then you see the Nephilim skull is opposite of ours. You know,
but one other thing you just said too is like another good example of this, where like that God allowed something that He really didn't want to happen, was the story of Samson. Remember, Samson sees a Philistine woman, and then his dad's like, he tells his dad, "Go get her for me."
Yep.
She's right in my eyes. And then so it actually says that the God was going to use this. So He allowed it to happen, that he would marry this Philistine, and obviously ends terribly, right?
Yep.
That like there's this conflict between the people. Eventually she gets burned in her house and like with her father. And this causes Samson to go on a rage and kill a bunch of Philistines. And then you go all the way to the end of the book of Judges. And I felt like this was like one of these verses that helped me understand the Old Testament so much better, because a lot of people who don't understand the Bible always say, why did God ever want them to do this? Why did God ever allow this to happen? And it says at the end of the book of Judges, it says, "And there was no king in Israel in those days, and every man did what was right in his own eyes." And it's like,
that's some Illuminati stuff right there.
That is something right there where it's like you could put that verse in almost anywhere in the Old Testament. So when you ask, why did this happen? It's because people were doing what was right in their own eyes. And it's because it's like, that's how you know that we serve a sovereign God, is the story of Samson. It's like something that He really didn't want him to do, but I'm going to use it anyways. Like, so no matter what you do, I'm going to use it for my plan. Yep. If he would have done, because you think about it, like Samson is like the worst Nazarite ever.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? Like immediately he's touching dead things. He's drinking wine. He's doing all the things that he's not supposed to do. And then eventually the story of Samson's kind of comical. It's like, did he not know he was being played by this woman who's trying to tie him up every night? Like, tell me the secret of your strength. Oh, that was, what I'm saying?
I wonder, like, was he like, I don't know. I don't think he was drunk, obviously, because he was, forbidden to do that. And he seemed like he wasn't doing those things. But I mean, he couldn't have been completely oblivious to it.
Well, it's kind of like in the way that you think it's like, it seems so dumb, like that how he got tricked. But it's almost like in the way that, well, it was pretty dumb that Pharaoh didn't let God's people go.
Yeah.
But it's explicit
heart,
Well, it's explicit in the text that Pharaoh, like, he couldn't even like Pharaoh rebelled, and then God hardened his heart. Yeah. So then He made him even dumber to do what was to do the opposite what was in his best interest. So maybe that's a situation where it's like Samson is making all these mistakes, and he's like, I'm going to make him make a bigger mistake, but I'm going to take this mistake and I'm going to use it for my glory. And I think I think that's probably a better way to maybe understand why certain things were allowed to happen, versus if you really did what God had originally intended, you would never had to suffer all the other things. Like, God's plan would have still worked out. It would have worked out better for you if you would have just listened to kind of obviously what God's leading you to. But I want to go back to because this is the Ancient Roots of Life and Wellness podcast. We were talking about food a little bit. Isn't it interesting? You mentioned Daniel a couple of times. Remember what Daniel wanted to eat? He wanted vegetables and water to eat.
Yeah, to prove
so
that
he didn't ask for just
better.
Clean animals. He asked for vegetables and water. So he didn't want the king's rations of wine and meat and whatever. And he's like, no, you eat that, you're going to be...
Didn't he say that he didn't want the animals because he doesn't eat the animals that they were going to eat? Like they were not, like he would defile himself, and then he chose just to eat the vegetables and the produce of it?
I've heard different interpretations. I'll bring the scripture up in a second, but I've heard different interpretations where people say that it's kind of like that he didn't want to be beholden to this man. So he wanted to be able to kind of be on his own, and he's got his own traditions. I mean, it could be just something as simple as like he wants to be set apart from them.
Yeah.
So like he's in Babylon, but he's not of Babylon. He's going to be.
I get that. I definitely get
because
that. Because
obviously they tried to change his name. Isn't it interesting that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that's really not their real names? It was like
Azariah,
Balthazar,
Mishael, Azariah.
Yeah. So they obviously, but obviously Daniel was Balthashar. Is that what his name was changed to?
Belshazzar or something like that. Yeah. Like that.
But obviously they call him that a little bit in the book, but eventually it's like he's Daniel.
Yeah.
Even the Babylonians called him Daniel because he was set apart from them.
Yep. Everything was Bel. They had to be Bel or Baal.
Well, that was their god was Bel.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Bel and the dragon is one of the apocryphal texts.
Was he another name for Zeus? Probably.
Yeah.
It's
interesting when you think of like the paralysis that people get in their face nowadays.
Bell's palsy.
Yeah, the palsy. Daniel's an interesting one with that because everybody gets into the Daniel fast and brings it up. You get into the fact that, that I do believe, if you go carnivore, the way that carnivore is even being kind of portrayed and described these days, I think is incorrect based on what it was founded on. Like people think that I have some fruit and I mostly eat meat. That's basically like a modified keto. That's like a high intensity keto. But, going back to what you said about, can you do too much meat? I do believe that the body is supposed to have a healthy balance between them, the quote-unquote macros, the protein, fat, and carbs. And that the body, sure, it can convert things into other things, and it can waste a lot of energy doing that. It can still... But, if you're going to be a quote-unquote carnivore, it would be an adaptation diet, meaning you would be changing the chemistry of your gut by not eating carbs and only eating protein and fats from the meat that you're getting. So nowadays, if somebody's doing some carbs and things like that, you're basically doing a keto. But I think I've seen people, there's people who are like, look, she's 84 years old. She looks great. She eats only meat. I think that's great. But pretty much 100% of the people that I've talked to that have been like that for decades, and they're like, oh, people are just now coming to this. They still eat a little bit of this or a little bit of that. So I still think that they're focusing mostly on a ketogenic diet. But people push everything. I pushed the plant-based eating really hard until Joshua, my oldest son, his front 4 teeth basically rotted out. And that made me go, what is going on? We had to go through all this process of getting them fixed and everything, which was a waste. And his real ones just grew in beautiful anyways. Or his real ones. His adult ones just grew in really beautiful in the end anyways. But of course, I was like new daddy, all freaked out and everything like that. But it stirred me up to start thinking about, why did that happen? And that's where I started to look at the vitamin K2 content that's just not present in many vegetarian sources or plant-based sources. And then other things like the copper. Nowadays, maybe in the back in the day, it had a lot more abundance inside of the produce section. But now, short of getting wheatgrass or different things like that, you don't find it. You find copper in whole food vitamin C and different things like that, where fruits are a big focus. But even people go into that. For a long time, we were fruitarian and eating only, mostly.
Well, isn't it interesting? Isn't it kind of like the beginning of the book of Genesis? It's almost said. I mean, the way it's written, it would make you believe that God made fruit for men. And the green things were for animals.
Yeah. Well, he tells you what is it? A seed bearing green, or wait, how does it call it?
Let me. I'll look that up. So
it's got to be it's.
Is that in Genesis? Is that in Genesis 2?
Because even in Leviticus or whatever, I forget what he's talking about. He talks about it, the focus on seeds, fruit bearing seeds and. Because a lot of people go into is seaweed considered a...
Oh, here's what it says. It says, talks about after he made, this is Genesis 1, it says, and God blessed them, and God said unto them, be fruitful and multiply, replenish the earth. It's kind of an interesting word they use, replenish the earth, right after he just created them. Mm-hmm. I guess I never really even noticed that. That's a
Earth
replenish.
was without
Should he have just said
form and
plenish?
void, yeah.
Should he have said plenish the earth? And have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the fowl of the air and every living thing that moveth upon the earth. And God said, Behold, I have given you every herb bearing seed which is upon the face of the earth, and every tree, and in which is the fruit of the tree yielding seed, to you it shall be for meat. And for every beast of the earth, and every fowl in the air, and everything that creepeth upon the earth, wherein there is life, I have given you every green herb for meat. And it was so. So he was saying like that he gave like the fruit of the trees for man, for meat.
Yeah, I wonder what the meat word is there. Like, is it literally?
I don't know. That's
about,
KJV.
Like,
it's funny because I normally don't read the KJV all the time, but I did notice
sometimes
that the
it's
one time where it's like he was saying that he gave every green herb to the animals, and he gave the fruit of the tree yielding seed is for the men to eat.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely want the seed stuff still to this day is strong.
Yeah, let me. I pulled up that part in Daniel too, and here's what it says. This is Daniel 1:5-15. It says, "And the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat and of the wine which is drank, so nourishing them 3 years, that at the end of thereof they might stand before the king. Now among these were the children of Judah." So we'll get our answer for that. Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, unto which the prince of the eunuchs gave them names, and he gave them unto Daniel was Belteshazzar, and Hananiah Shadrach, and Mishael Meshach, and Azariah Abednego. But Daniel proposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested the prince of eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Now God had brought Daniel into favor and tender love with the prince of the eunuchs. And the prince of the eunuchs said unto Daniel, I fear the Lord the king, who hath appointed you your meat and your drink. For why should he see your faces worse liking than the children which are of your sort? Then shall ye make me endanger my head with the king. And then Daniel said to Melzar, whom the prince of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, prove thy servants, I beseech thee, 10 days let me give us pulse to eat. Of course, this is the King James. Pulse to eat. I thought he said, and water to drink. Let me see the... where does it say?
Produce and stuff like that, right? Vegetables.
Yeah, pulse. That's a strange word. Let me see the compare it, and it says. So then let's see what the New King James says. It says, did I get the wrong verse? Yeah, in the New King James it says, please test your servants for 10 days. Let them give us vegetables to eat and water to drink.
10 days.
So it really doesn't say why he was going to defile himself. I mean, I think lots of people would kind of just naturally assumed that he's trying to feed them pork or something, some
Could
unclean
be.
animals.
It doesn't say it though.
It doesn't say at all. Mm-hmm. I mean, why did that? Was that going to defile them? It does almost seem like that they were just trying. He was like Daniel specifically. He's trying to be set apart from them.
Could be, yeah.
Altogether.
Or it could be as simple as the fact that like unclean meat, like you see with Peter and Paul and different things like that. You know what I mean? They're always like, no, I don't want to.
GMO stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty.
No, I'm not going to eat that corn-fed cattle. No way.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's pretty. That's the Daniel fast is a big thing in the world. Like I grew up having that around with my family and different things.
Somebody did 40 days.
I mean, they would do the. Yeah, I guess they would have. Like I'm sure people would do all different types of. Durations based on that, like, some longer.
Doesn't 40
shorter.
days and 40 nights, that seems to me like that's a miracle that you could fast like that and not die. I mean, so obviously, who are the only examples in the Bible? You have Moses,
Moses did it
Daniel.
twice. That's what's insane is he came down after the golden calf and then went back up
Oh, yeah.
and did it again. I mean, Moses is incredible and gangster. Like I always say gangster for whatever reason, but just incredibly like amazing with like his only thing I think of like that, that's what we used to say, like gangster for whatever reason as a kid. But like they were the ones that were like, they would do the most intense of things, like is what that meant. Like when I would say that when I was younger, but it's like, he just was really, everything he did was as hardcore as he could possibly do it with stuff like that for the people. And he did it twice, it's,
I never even think about him doing it twice, but yeah. So you have Moses, I guess, doing it twice. Then you have Daniel, and then you have Jesus. Is there any? Am I missing anyone?
Ezra did 3 weeks in a row, like 7 days, 7 days, 7 days, but he did little things in between them, whether it was the flowers or the honey, things like that. Well, who else? There was somebody, because him and Baruch basically both did that. Like they saw their visions basically at the end of like certain specific fasts that they were doing. So, but I don't think anybody else that I know like did 40. I thought there was one that was in there that I used to add in there that I can't remember. But those you listed are definitely those are correct. I mean,
But you'd have to conclude that it's a miracle that they didn't die.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people now are finding that you can dry fast for like there's even a lot of New Agers and stuff. People are really into the other stuff, that I talk to. And one guy he was pushing, he's pretty big on the internet or YouTube and stuff like that. But he's like 30 days of dry fasting is like what he said he's up to right now. Feels like he could do more, but I mean, a 3 or 7 day dry fast, if you can do that, you're pretty incredible yourself.
I know, that's what I'm saying, but like 40 days, like I mean,
it's got to be supernatural,
It does, yeah. That's what I'm saying. I think that don't do that unless God tells you to do that, because I think that most normal people would. And obviously, you think about it, like if there was a Mount Rushmore, this wasn't satanic. You would have Moses and Daniel on it, and obviously, then we're talking about God's son. So he's in a different category altogether. But I mean, like you're really talking about like that, like who in the Bible can you almost compare to those two?
Yeah,
Moses and Daniel.
Moses, Noah, Daniel, and Job, because they always.
Well, it was funny. I know that I want to say is in the book of Ezekiel that God says like even if Noah, Job, and Daniel were here, I would kill everyone else except for them.
Yeah. Ezekiel 14.
Because he's saying, like, they wouldn't be, as righteous as they are, they wouldn't be enough to save this place.
Yep.
It's interesting, like I said, I always think that's crazy because you think about it that Daniel is a contemporary of Ezekiel. So it's easy always to look back and say, like, you have these really, because everybody who's gone before us, we venerate people who are gone. Mm-hmm. But to put Daniel at the time he was alive during the captivity and put them with people like Job and Moses, or Moses and Noah, and obviously God saved Noah out of the whole world.
Yeah.
So I mean that's pretty good company. Like out of everybody, the only people who got to live were the ones who were related to him.
Absolutely, yeah. That's amazing.
No, so I mean that's what I'm saying. So like when you think about Daniel, like being able to fast for 40 days, Moses being able to do it twice. Yeah, you're talking about a pretty elite company.
I mean, Daniel was like Joseph, like he was put into
Joseph as well.
A pretty special position that I don't think you can really, like Abraham, of course, Noah, of course, they all had their prestige about them, like from what Abba asked of them and what they accepted and did. But those two specifically were placed in very, very special places of power. And things that they had to do. I mean, Daniel's rise and fall and like all the things he went through, from the lion's den to the not bow. Like same thing was like.
Yeah, it's really amazing the typology between Joseph and Daniel, like how similar they are. That they both go into captivity or slavery, right? And they rise because of their connection with God. And then even in the midst of their rise, they get thrown into a pit. They get thrown in, like Daniel gets thrown into the lion's den.
Yep.
Joseph gets thrown into prison. And only the reason they got thrown in there because they were not guilty, or because Daniel was praying to God. Joseph was not defiling himself with Potiphar's wife. Mm-hmm. No, I mentioned that because I always love the story. Of course, my name is Joseph, so I always think like that's a pretty good character in the Bible. And him and Daniel are not that they were perfect, but they're kind of an elite list of like people that never mentions their flaws.
Yeah. I mean, obviously Joseph had his arrogance in a way, like, you know, and pride, like that kind of became his kind of the catalyst for why he was put through what he went through. You know what I mean? Like it was kind of like maybe that wasn't the core of him, but like he had his moments like that, which led his brothers to do those things, and then it ended up.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. But you know, I used to think about that being prideful, but I almost think because I've done quite a few studies where I was using the comparison of like all the typology between Joseph and then Jesus, like all the things that they did, all the things they went through, and so you really think about it. It's the same way where it's like that. Was Jesus being prideful when he was talking about how much God loved his son and how he was? But I mean, that's why they killed him, is because the way he talked about his connection with God. And so that's what he's saying. Like, you hate me because I'm telling you the truth. I'm not testifying about myself. You know, I'm testifying from what God has told me to tell you guys, and you guys hate me for it. And so the same way Joseph got a dream, obviously was directly from God. And then Joseph told them the dream, and then they hated him for it. But you're right. If they didn't hate him, they would never have sold him into slavery, and then he never would have been able to save him. In the same way that if Jesus didn't tell them the truth, they would not have crucified him. And if they didn't crucify him, then none of us could be saved.
Yeah, everything.
You know, it's kind of like, it's amazing. It's like, well, I mean, if you think about it, regardless if Joseph was a little too arrogant about, or too cocky telling them what God said, like God used that in order to save everyone, because obviously it all comes through the end. I mean, I can talk about this kind of stuff all day. It's just so interesting to think like all the way that this is like, this shows God's sovereignty of, like how we said, it's like, did God really ever want it to be like that? You know, and so like we can view the Bible trying to emulate these Old Testament patriarchs, but it's like that God used them. But obviously most of them are like, they're not like Joseph and Daniel, where you can like their flaws are just laid bare. And then so sometimes you're like, well, at least I wasn't like David. I mean, David's pretty good, but I've never done anything as bad as David did. Like, you probably never did anything as good as David either. So
yeah, that's true.
The point is like that he did a lot of really good things, and I think that's it's a way that God can show you. But I mean, you think about that he did this really bad thing, and then there was consequences. And so you really think about like probably the second half of David's life, which would have been probably really good. It was just turmoil in his family this whole time. So you could say, oh, well, God forgave him. It's like, but he had to deal with that the rest of his life. You know what I'm saying? Like that. Sometimes you have to see like that. If he would have done it the way that God would have wanted him to do it, he never would have had to deal with all that stuff. But because he did, you know,
not everything is a type of Messiah. You know, that's the thing too. When people compare and contrast everything else, even when we were talking about the sacrifice earlier, the annual sacrifice, it's like that all comes from Abraham and Isaac. And, you know, even when people look at it, it's like Abraham told Isaac that he would provide himself a lamb, but we know that a ram is what showed up at that moment for him to sacrifice when Isaac was taken off the altar. So he was obviously talking and foreshadowing Messiah. And then you can even see the sacrifice like was always done on the Passover with the lamb. So it's literally like foreshadowing him through that. And everything was meant to point towards them, but then everything else became this, what you saw with the golden calf. And it was twice that happened. But basically where they said, you know, tomorrow's a feast for Yah or for Abba, for God, whatever, you know, or for the Lord, it says. And And then, they're like, oh, that's a feast, right? You can make a feast for the father and everything. And then why does he tell Moses, like, I'm going to kill everybody and start over and make a great nation of you? If he really was like honoring these things. So obviously, even what I was going to say, like Abraham is the most perfect example of Abba's perfect will and then his imperfect will. When you look at Hagar versus Jacob, Hagar versus Sarah. Sarah, and I was thinking of like down the line, like what I was going to go into, but you have Sarah, and then you have Hagar, and obviously it was like they didn't wait, they didn't believe, what they weren't doing that, so she gave him her concubine, and he still made a great nation out of Ishmael. Don't get me wrong, like obviously, but it's exactly what he had planned to do, and then it's like his modification based on his long suffering and love for his children, like based on like the mistakes and the actions and everything that they do. And I always, same thing as like I tell people, like be careful what you pray for, because many times Abba's going to give you what you're asking for to teach you that it wasn't the right time, or whatever it is. I've learned that many times in my life, and especially in this business, because a lot of times you're like, yes, like big days, but now I got more inventory, I got a new shop, everything, but it's like it's a bigger hustle equals, like they say, more money, more problems, but in a different way. Even in a righteous way, you can be impatient in something, and Abba's like already got it laid out. He's got the whole thing laid out for you, but you're like, oh, I need this right now, or I need this, and or you just don't believe that he's going to provide the things that you've already asked for. And same thing with Abraham and Sarah. Like their names changed, Jacob's name changed, Ephraim's name changed. A lot of things. I believe Messiah's name changed. He told you it was going to change with his return. And those are all the people that have the biggest core. And then you see it even with Joseph and Daniel. Both of their names changed.
Yeah, they got new names.
Like they had a role name that was like, this is their role and what they're doing. But like they retained their righteous name that... I could talk about this forever too. I know we were going to keep these around an hour, dude. And we could leave it like this with what we talked about for the health side of it too. And then
I feel like we kind of covered some health stuff. So no, I think this was awesome. I think that this is the stuff that I think it's important. I think the whole conversation's important. And I think that was a great point you made about be careful what you pray for. I feel like that. I know I've not been shy about saying like this is my goal is to do this full time, but I know every now and then like I do have almost like that wake up in a cold sweat moment of like it's happening now, and it's like like the thing you're like hoping for, and then like knowing that the way this life is just a shadow of the life that we hope to have in heaven one day. Like we know that like nothing is ever completely like you want it to be. So like you're kind of wondering like what's going to be wrong about doing. You ever feel like that where you're like, oh man, like that, like striving for something you want is kind of like really like what gets us through the day. You kind of always kind of. I mean, that's kind of like I feel like that's always been what I've known about life. It's very difficult to just be content with like what you have, and I think that's what you were talking about with like the Israelites where. Yeah, I think that if they would have humbly asked for something in a different way, I mean, that's what it was. I do kind of wonder about the health aspect of it because it was like he didn't give him quail first. He gave him manna, and then he was mad. But you're right. The thing that God was most upset with is like, well, put it this way: what if he didn't want to give them meat? Yeah. But he would have willingly gave it to him. But the way that they were acting is the real
they're grumbling.
That was the real reason he wanted to kill them all. It's not because they wanted to be go on the carnivore diet. That's not why he was that mad. But no, I mean, but that's interesting to think about that God will give you what you want sometimes, only to show you that you didn't really ask me what I wanted for you. Yeah. If you would have asked me what I wanted for you, I'd have gave you something better, and you wouldn't have had to learn that hard lesson. I feel like that, fortunately for most of us, we got to learn the friggin' hard way. It's like the difference between knowing versus understanding is messing up most of the time, right? Like you have to, like, that's how unfortunately, we're probably like us guys mostly. It's like we're hard-headed. I want to do it this way. This is the way. I know. I got it. You go up and then you do something stupid, and then you're like, I got some good advice back there.
Like Joseph, when he asked the guy to remember him, when he interpreted his dream, and he got stuck down there longer. And it's like, even in that moment of like righteousness, you know, he was like interpreting it. He used his gift that Abba had given him, and then he stayed in prison longer, or whatever, in jail, whatever they call it down there, longer, because he asked the cupbearer to remember him. And I don't know, is that in the canon, or is that only in Jasher?
Oh no, yeah, that's definitely. I mean, I always said that was another one of those typologies. But I thought was kind of interesting is that you have the thief on the cross. What does he say to the Lord? Remember me.
Yeah.
Of course, Jesus did remember him. It took that guy a couple years to remember. Oh yeah, you know who's good at interpreting dreams? That guy in jail. I think he's still down there.
He did, he did make him wait. Yeah,
he did remember eventually.
Yeah.
When it was beneficial to him to know about that. Yep. No, but yeah, it's really cool to think that. I don't know. I really do think that the more you read your Bible, the more you just like you can. Man, I just feel like that sometimes you think you're really getting a handle on it, but then you kind of like somebody shows you, and it's amazing the places it came. Because I mean, if you guys have listened to Old World Florida, and like I said, just this little thing where it's like I said, I'm not on Vegetable Island yet. I'm not just doing that kind of thing, but just the fact that he pointed to something that made me think, and it was kind of set off something else, and then it's less about the carnivore versus veganism. It's more like
for sure.
Like just seeing like what does God actually want them to do versus what they did. And then how did God use that later, even though they did the wrong thing? And I think that's the story of the whole book is what did God intend versus what did man do? And then how did God use that eventually to ultimately benefit all of us? And I feel like that's kind of like, if that's the one thing you take out of the gospel, other than obviously God sent his son for you, that's how you kind of interpret your life, is like that. Maybe that's the thing. It's like what does God actually want for you to do versus what have you done, and how has God even used your mistakes to push you forward to make you who you are, and then learning from that, how is he using? What do you want now versus what does God want for you?
Yeah, and how is he answering your prayers versus what you expected from, like, you're asking for something specific. And like for me, like I for a long time was like, I want to save some money. I feel like I'm spending all these fees and stuff, like trying to grow the business. And like just what happened this weekend when they like cut things off, like if they hadn't have like cut that off and said, we don't like your thyroid products, you know, sure, it was a little hassle, but I told Sarah, this is probably the first time that I didn't like freak out, you know, where I didn't like kind of go like, oh my gosh, like what's going to happen? Like even for a second, you know, I've gotten better over the years, but like, because he did that, he answered so many prayers, and where at first I could have had major shell shock, and I did kind of, you know, but I didn't freak out. And I told Sarah, I was like, I'm just going to let this roll because I feel like it's going to be something good. And sure enough, I saw all these different things that people opened my mind to because I did a little research and stuff. And I was just at the end of it going, thank you, Father. Like I never would have made these decisions right now. And in the midst of all this with the new facility and stuff like that, it ended up being something so good. But my prayers, I never would have expected them to be answered like that. And that's the thing too. Sometimes I've had to look back in retrospect like, oh my gosh, like he already answered it. And I'm over here being a knucklehead, like still expecting something that's already come into like play. Like, because you start to realize certain times that like he set this up with this person, and then you met somebody and then talked to somebody about this, and then it lined up, and you realize like 10 years ago, like it was already being put into place. Even like my son, we meet this guy when we went down to Texas traveling one time, and he, like Joshua and Sarah, my wife, had prayed because Joshua was like, you know, he really wanted this, like the old school trains, you know, like that, like our fathers had and stuff like that. And Sarah was teaching him about prayer. She was like, you know, like not all material things are going to be blessed to you, but you know, if you do, you need to get used to asking Abba. Like if you really want that, that's kind of expensive. No joke. we meet this guy when we had just randomly traveled, like been down there in Dallas area. He comes over and we meet him for the first time after knowing him online for a while. And then he brings up something about these trains, and Joshua was like, wow, I can't wait. Like, I really want this. And like, I've been so excited. And he goes, I have a whole box that my mom just told me to get out of her house.
Oh,
they
wow.
were literally brand new in the box from 1983, the year I was born. And his dad had bought them for him, and they went to 5 different houses. Nobody ever used them. They were literally brand new in the box, like really expensive train sets. And I told Joshua, I was like, think about that. 40 something years ago, his dad had it on his heart to go buy that for his son, and later it was never used. And now, when you just prayed, 24 hours later, less than 24 hours later, he brings them this box of
that's
trains.
like Chill's moments. Like that's
and he's
amazing.
he's 4 or 5 years old at the time, and he's like losing his mind because he's like he can't rationalize like how I just prayed. I can't see this. This God that everybody talks about. I can't physically see him. I know he's there, and he's so little to understand the stuff. He's like, and I just asked for it, and it just showed up like this. And you could see he even felt the power of that. So we can't ask, just like we can't tell the body how to detox. It's going to fix what it wants to fix. It doesn't care what we think. It's going to go after its task list first. Abba's perfect will is always going to be significantly better than ours. And, many times we're praying for things, but we have to be aware of the fact that they're going to come how he wants them to come. And many times when we put pressure on it, the result ends up being at least harder in some way or something. You know what I mean? It's not always like the smooth thing. And Abba's always got his perfect will for us.
Well, praise God, man. That's actually a pretty cool story because you really think about it like that. I believe that your son now will know that prayer works.
Yeah.
Now
right.
maybe he'll have to learn the lesson. Like maybe it won't work that easily every time, but
yeah.
But it is pretty cool to see that like you can witness a miracle in that. I mean, I would say that's certainly a miracle, especially the way that those things were never even used. I mean, that
was unbelievable in the box, and they were 1983, and
I bet you those things are worth a lot of money.
They are, and now they didn't get treated like they were, because he was 4 years old.
Oh, no, but I mean, that's still, that's kind of the funny thing. Like, obviously, us guys, the reason they're worth a lot, toys that boys play with are worth more than girls. For one, is guys, little boys tear crap up.
Yeah.
So you don't normally have them in good condition when they're old.
Yeah.
And for two, men buy toys probably more than girls do, so they buy their old toys back. But no, I mean it's better. I mean, obviously this is what they're intended for. So I mean that's cool. Yeah, I think that's the real cool thing about the story is that that your son will have felt the touch of God, like in a way.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of us have had situations where you pray for something and then it does feel like that God answered your prayer, and then like almost like the cynicism that's still in us refuses you to accept that was a miracle what just happened. Something you never feel like that where you're like, I had a situation like that years ago where I was like, maybe that was, and I'm thinking like, do you believe what you're even praying for or not? And I thought it'd be like, just accept it and just enjoy that. Yeah. Like God did something. And I feel like that, it's easy to become cynical, but it's cool to see that as a young boy, like he could experience something like that. And
he did.
But obviously, as a father,
life,
I'm sure it's really cool to see that. Like, wow, you saw the miracle, and it was God, and you can always remind him of that. Like almost no matter what situation he has to pray for later, is saying, "Do you remember when God showed up 24 hours after you asked that? That's a pretty specific thing you asked for."
He used to like my kids have always been. Now we live where tornadoes like all happen in this whole like vicinity and all around and stuff. But my kids now, like when we go, well, it's always funny. We watch Max Weather like it's the NFL of old for me, And like we have it up, and my sons are just like they go outside, they raise their hands, and they're like, especially my little guy, he's like, Abba, can you please move the storms away from us? And like he says it with such incredible confidence, and like he knows it's gonna happen. happen because he's seen it like numerous times where he sees daddy. Like I do this thing where I like chop it up and I'm like, move it out, father, move it out with the kids and make it fun and stuff. But like both my kids, even Joshua, my older one, from a young age, like he's done that where like he wanted the moon one time to come out. So like he told his Mimi and she's like, no, it's okay. It's super overcast. Like, and we're in Vegas and she's like, it's overcast. It's not going to move here. And he's like, no, you watch. And he like prayed and asked Abba to clear it out so she could see the beautiful big full moon. And sure enough, like not even like minutes later, this whole thing opened up and it just sat with an open circle over the moon.
Dang, man,
with the clouds. And so it's like, it's not, but sometimes he'll do certain things.
You got another Daniel in the making.
Yeah. Yeah. Good stuff, man.
That's cool, man. But yeah, anyways, guys, obviously we've been talking about this and who knows, this show is, I know how podcasts go at this point now that you start making a podcast. This is episode number 7. We're figuring out what this is. So I hope you guys enjoy this conversation. I think you guys probably will because I knew the last time I think that we were rapid firing talking about Apocrypha and everything. I was thinking like this. We're really kind of nerding out the more I was listening back to it. It's like if you don't know what we're talking about.
I did watch that one all the way through. Like you could
be a little bit lost. How quickly we're jumping to something else. But no, but I think this one was good. Is like because I think that we obviously the main focus is pray for what God wants for you. I remember that was one lesson. I think I'll just leave it with this: is that I wanted a lot of things that brought me harm, and then one day I said, God, I don't even know what I want. And even if I got it, I'm not sure what I'd do with it. So why don't you just do what you want, and we'll see how. I'll let you drive for a while. And I feel like that's really what I'd like to leave you guys with because, when you start letting go of like the things you want, because if you know the things you got, that God, obviously God did bless me for some years with the things that I wanted, and it left me empty. Yeah. And then it left me wanting something else. And then it's like, maybe your way is better, God. I'm pretty sure that it is. So why don't you just do your thing, and I'll just wait for whatever you got and be patient about it. So. But anyways, guys, obviously, I hope that if that reaches you guys today. But please support the show if you guys want to hear more. Obviously, we were going to talk about questions. I always talk about having some questions. I'm sorry if I've not been diligent about reading all the comments. But if you guys got questions, please leave questions on here so maybe we can do that in a future podcast. Please support the sponsor of this show, Modern Roots Life. Link in the description. Obviously, any kind of information you want about that. If you're looking for healthy, natural supplements, Modern Roots has got you. So guys, please check that out. And just really appreciate you guys hanging out with us. Love you guys. God bless.
Thanks, guys.
Everyone left me. Everyone deserted me. Jesus was always there. When everyone hated me and walked away, Jesus never walked away.